Welcome to the Inside Digital Transformation Podcast. Inside Digital Transformation explores how organizations of every size and shape are using technology today to survive and thrive in the face of relentless change. If you are a business or technology leader charged with making the most of digital transformation in your organization, then this podcast is for you. And now here's your host, Alan Bernard, a technology journalist, editor, and copywriter who has been covering the intersection of business and technology for over 2 decades.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm talking with Nicola Morini Bianzino, Global Chief Technology Officer at EY, a $45 billion tax and advisory company with 360,000 associates worldwide, about how he is using AI, a data fabric, digital process twins, and lots of trial and error to find business process optimization opportunities that would otherwise go unnoticed. Nicola, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, Nicola. Thank you for your time today. So I like to start off every podcast with the same question, and that is, what is your definition of digital transformation?
It's funny that we're still, grappling with that definition. But to me, the digital transformation is effectively how you use technology to extract the maximum amount of value from a business, right? So sometimes that type of digital transformation has been kind of misinterpreted in the sense that, we have a bunch of technology, let's figure out what we can do with it, as opposed to have a more thoughtful approach to how you actually elevate the performance of the company, of any company, in any industry, in any segment, through the use of technology.
Okay. I have one that I've been rolling out, and that is, using digital technologies to change the status quo.
It's a very good one. And I think, maybe this is also pertinent to our conversation later on. I think one of the things that maybe the concept of digital transformation in a restrictive definition of being focused mainly on technology, which it should, it's left a little bit the human element out as well, right? So I think, when you start thinking about, how do you impact the performance of an organization, it actually starts with how you impact the performance of the people working for the organization. And sometimes, we tend to overlook it.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually kind of a nice segue into what we're going to talk about today, which is a process digital twin. What's the correct expression? Because I've done some research, and that doesn't really pop up as a search term, a process twin. How do you define what you're doing?
Yeah, so I think in general, when I look at the concept of the digital twin as it actually grew out of manufacturing, right, there was very much focus on specific segments of the manufacturing process, right? So you have, the most famous example is the General Electric turbine, right? That was done, many years ago. It was very visionary type of work. And so, but what I've seen in the market has been very much about atomization of the use of the digital twin, right? So you take a piece of the manufacturing process, you take a piece of the sales process, and you try to create effectively a digital twin of it. So to understand, how you can do scenarios and simulations around that. So I asked myself, and inside EY, and I said, why don't we take this concept of the atomic level digital twin, if that makes sense as a definition, and then we elevate it. We elevate it at the process level. So we try to see how the whole value chain plays out. So you can, it's not very particular on the name of it, right? You can call it the way you want it, but at the end of the day, right, it's really the focus of abstracting from one specific element or step of the process into probably the value chain in the overall process for an enterprise. And then you can take the concept and take it even one step further, which is, can you at some point create a digital twin of the enterprise and all its interactions? That would be really interesting. But of course, we're not quite there yet.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things I came across when I did my research is that business process optimization, automation, management is a similar activity, where it seems to dovetail nicely with what we talked about last time. Would you agree? And how does the process twin differ from a business process optimization exercise?
Yeah, so the automation to me, it's more about, this is the process as I define, and then can I use technology to make it more efficient, but effectively not changing or not evolving the process. So to me, that is
Okay.
a little bit restrictive. So the way I'm thinking about it, and of course, I might be completely off, so I'd love to get your perspective on that, is that to me, a process, because for enterprises now, these processes are actually very, very complex, right? So there are, technology element, funding, investment, interaction with ecosystem partners, the people that are performing those processes are so complex that being able to define and write a process beforehand and then execute it across all these different combination and permutation of environmental variables, it's really hard. And so I said, is there another approach where the process becomes more adaptive, right? So as you execute it, you learn about it and you quickly, update the different steps, you choose different paths until you use effectively the empirical experience to refine and evolve the process itself. So think about, for example, in our business, it's a very judgment-based type of business, right? So we ingest an enormous amount of data from our clients, and then an EY professional, it doesn't matter really in what part of our business, but effectively, we apply our knowledge, our experiences, we apply, the regulations, of course, that we need to be compliant with, et cetera, and then we produce an output, right? It's an advice to a client. It can be like a tax return. It can be an audit opinion, et cetera, et cetera. So a complex deliverable. So in that kind of an environment, right, so everything is basically centered on the person, right? It's the person that makes that judgment. And so we all love our people and we think that we have the best people in the world. But of course, you may have variations in terms of the performance of the people and the outcomes that you get out of it. And so is there an opportunity to start collecting data on the process of judgment itself so that you can be in a situation where at some point you offer a specific person at EY an option to actually buy into that scenario, perform that step or not, right? So for example, like you say, think about a recommendation engine. So you are about to make a call about something, right? And you say, okay, you know what, 85% of the people that are in that specific situation, they choose path A as opposed to path B. You may choose path B because we think that the human has to have the preeminence, in the process, but that particular deviation from the step is recorded, but is allowed, right? So I think what I believe is that it's impossible for the complexity of the companies that we work with and our clients, but even for ourselves, it's impossible to build these global processes that are valid for every possible scenario. So adding that element of dynamism and learning, on the job, I guess, for the machine, I think adds a lot of value for the organization.
So how are you doing that? How are you hoovering up all this data that's very subjective? It's very, as you say, judgment oriented, right? Right. I mean, EY is a consulting, a professional services firm, tax and advisory, right? So these are all, there's a lot of steps involved in these processes and the outcomes are very indefinite, right? As opposed to a manufacturing process where you have known inputs and a known output. Right.
Yeah. Let me sorry.
No, please go ahead. Please.
No. So let me premise that we're just at the beginning. Okay. So what I articulated is the vision, of course, but we're at the beginning of it. So, but we're already seeing like an enormous amount of value out of it. But it's not that dissimilar from someone being in a call center, right? When you interact with the person on the call center and the system, offers opportunities or advice to the person, to the call center operator to engage the customer, for example, in a different level or offer upselling and cross-selling, etc. That's the recommendation.
So they exist. I mean, they've been used for years in call centers.
What we're trying to do is to make it a little bit more dynamical in the sense that instead of being pre-configured, so, if Alan, our prototypical customer in this particular, it makes a call because he's not happy about his billing, let's try to sell him a specific service. Okay, so that works maybe 70% of the time. So statistical gaming, I guess, right, at that point, right? Because you try to have an answer that satisfies the highest number of situations, but it's not as precise, right? Because somebody has built it in the system. Like, it's a difference between AI and expert systems, I guess, right? Expert system, everything, all the branches of they're very useful, by the way, right? So if you try to troubleshoot something, but they're not dynamic. So in a very complex environment where you have an enormous number of variables interacting with each other, being able to write a process with that level of details, right? It's really, really hard beforehand, right? So what we're trying to do is to add that kind of a dynamism. So we've been successful in implementing, first of all, a platform. You need the platform base, right? That allows you to capture the data. And right, so that's step number one. So we have built what we call the UI fabric. So it has many components, but now we have, let's say, one data backbone that spans across the whole of the enterprise.
And you did this yourself, or were you able to use off the shelf?
We work, our main partner is Microsoft. So we've been working very, very closely with Microsoft. I think they were amazing in the sense that they got the vision right away. And they started working with us. Even there were tools that didn't actually exist in the market yet, but they helped us, and of course, we helped them as well, testing some of these assumptions, but, we worked together very closely on that. So we couldn't have done it by ourselves. So we established that fabric, of, let's say, foundation for data. And then, every application is now built with the idea of recording as much data as possible around the metadata, the interactions between the machine and the human. This is not about Big Brother type of thing, okay? We're not, individualizing the feedback. So we don't know that Alan or Nicola has done that, okay? We just know that people do this, which exactly what we know, what we need and, to know. We don't need to know like specific, names of people at all. But then as we start collecting that allows us, for example, to develop like tools like we have done in audit where, we have a machine learning driven, GL analyzer, right? General ledger analyzer. So in audit, for example, right, when you do the audit, it really rests on the shoulder of the team who's performing the audit to understand where to look, into. Right, because sometimes some of the clients that we're working with are so enormous, we cannot look at every single piece of data that they produce, right? So
and they're all unique as well, right?
Exactly. So there is a very structured, regulated process that allows people to do that, but at the same time, there is an enormous amount of the kind of judgment and skepticism, I guess, that people have to build in the process, so that people ask themselves the question, what about this? What about that? Right? So this is, of course, very dependent on the experience and the quality of the people that we have doing that. We have a lot of methodologies and training that to help with that. But at the same time, we thought that, why don't we create a mechanism to look at a bigger universe of data? And so use machine learning to identify, some of these anomalies that may lead to potential problems, right? And so now we're using these tools across the board. And the system learns, right? So the system says, okay, so you're giving me an option to look into something, but that's not really relevant. Okay, next time I'm not going to have that option, right? So that was I was talking about in terms of the ability of these tools to evolve as they perform the process to become more intelligent, as opposed to building a static process that is hard-coded in the system. Does it make sense?
Getting there. So a static process, a static digital twin is simply a representation of a process or a product, a spinning machine of some sort.
That's right.
And it's providing you with data about the current state of that machine or process, right? What you've done is taken that, I'm assuming that's what you have, right? That's the baseline that you're working with. So you've ingested all the business process logic and things like that into this baseline, into the data fabric, maybe not the data fabric, and now the data fabric feeds that model, right? These are models. But you've added an AI layer, it sounds like, or a machine learning layer to that to create what? Now we've talked about recommendation engines, right?
Yeah.
But is that the goal? So what is the goal of adding the AI? Because the way I kind of was thinking about it was you were able to see, I think last time you said that you're able to spot, say, points of friction, for example.
Yeah.
Right, across 300,000 employees. But this seems to be a little bit different than what we talked about last time. This is more about best practices and, right? So
no, I'm not sure. No, I don't think so. I think so. When you are able to understand the data, in a different way, you understand how people approach specific problems, right? You can, of course, get better insights on the data. That's number one. And the second time that you look at what I call the metadata that sits on top of it, you have the ability of understanding how you can improve the process itself, as opposed to have a better insight. You see what I mean? So if you see like people, for example, spending an enormous amount of time doing a specific task over and over and over again, but the output of that task doesn't really change that much, is there an opportunity to intervene and change things? So automation would do some of it, right? So you want to automate a step. But when you have a really complex process with thousands of steps, right, automation in itself is not going to do it, because automation is hard-coded, as opposed to more dynamic elements. So you can have, for example, let's say you are producing over and over and over again the same piece of documentation, right? Can you automatically create that documentation using, for example, generative AI text-based tools, right? So, but the bottom line is that there are these two layers. There is the data on the client, right, that you're interacting with, and the data that allows you to understand how you interact with the client, and then can you improve that interaction, right? And interaction can be with a specific person, they can be with the process, it can be with the machine, made judgment, et cetera, et cetera.
So what I keep overlaying in my head is, where does the digital twin fit in? Because it sounds like you can do a lot of this with existing tools.
The digital twin, I think, fits in the sense that there are the traditional approach to business process is based on, you define the business process, there are specific agents, there are steps that you need to go through, and that pretty much is hard-coded. In this scenario, what we do is that the process is dynamically evolving, right? So as you perform the process itself gets optimized.
Okay.
So you're building a digital twin representation of the value chain that allows to evolve and look at the value chain as a whole, as opposed to specific steps of it.
Okay. How far along are you? You say you want to do the whole organization, but that's a bridge too far right now. Right?
That is too far. I think it would take some time to get there. In terms of specific processes, we are making significant progress. So we have, as I said, right, the first step was to establish the fabric, right? Data fabric at which is the backbone that allows you to capture the data that you need to perform the specific, process, but also the data on the process itself. So we made, very good progress on that. And then, we're starting to experiment, like I was making the example of the using AI to understand, for example, the different signals that we can spot through audit data, right? So we're evolving into tax right now as well, and then supply chain, etc. So we are going from, we started where we thought that the highest return was going to be. So we thought that audit was probably the most mature for that, because it's pretty much standardized data. The process is very well known, it's regulated, so we can, step in and significantly look at that. But in general, right, that, we're evolving it to the bigger enterprise. Of course, still at the level, not at the bigger macro enterprise level yet.
Right. Okay. I'm curious, how much of this, well, I guess you said you're working with Microsoft on this, but this isn't something I can go out as a CIO and buy, right?
No.
Can you talk about how the tools that you're using and some of that process?
So can you buy it off the shelf? No, because it doesn't really exist. It's a combination of capabilities, and you have to have the business case inside your organization to do it. We do, as I said, because we been judgment so important to the business that we perform. It's really critical for us to have the best possible understanding of the data and the resources at the disposal of our clients and our people, right? So, and there is a lot of knowledge that otherwise it's not captured, right? So, for example, when you start getting the process data, you start building a sort of a Uber repository of information about your business, right? So think about we have 360,000 people, right? They spend 8 hours a day, they're performing their jobs. So it's what, 2.5 million hours every day, right? That people do things. And traditionally, we didn't capture that. So we kind of, every day we start from fresh, right? We get the people in the office and they start doing the work again. But what about if you can start capturing the knowledge every day, and the knowledge accumulates? And so the recommendation engine becomes, the result of millions and millions and millions of hours of expertise that is now available at our fingertips.
Okay.
Yeah, so you basically track everything that's happening in this. So if you think about the enterprise as a system, right? So you're basically monitoring everything that happens in the system, right? And then monitoring coupled with AI techniques allows you to understand, signals in the system itself.
How long did it take you to establish a baseline so you could see the signals, right? Because you're looking for the deltas.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
As I said earlier, right? By no means we are done.
Right. Well, do you have one that you process twins you feel is fairly mature at this point, or not?
I think, yeah, conceptually, yes. Yes, okay. They're very mature. I mean, the thing is about these techniques, right, is that there is no like a day that you say, oh, we're done. Okay, right. So I have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, right? So it's a constant learning process. And so it's a constant evolution. It's dynamic, gets better in time. So maybe, on day 1 or day 2, you have 2% improvement, right? On day 3,000, you have a 50% improvement, right? So we need to look at it not as a one-stop or one-time technology implementation, right? It's an ongoing dynamic program.
So I want to talk about data quality too, because that's obviously a huge issue. Garbage in, garbage out, right? So how do you ensure that you're getting the right data? You're not just throwing a bunch of useless data at the model, and then just overloading it. And then the output, of course, is skewed, is biased because of that. So talk about data quality, how you're able to kind of provide some assurance that the data going in is giving you the outputs that will actually improve the business, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think a couple of things. So complete data quality is not possible, right? So you will always have different so
right.
The other concept I think to keep in mind is that these are not things that the machine does in isolation, right? So this is kind of concept like human in the loop type of scenario, right? Where it's the human and the machine. So the human provides feedback to what the machine does. And so, if you give me wrong advice and I override that advice consistently, right? The system learns that that's wrong advice, right? So it is more like, I guess, the data quality is definitely an issue, but in this type of scenarios, it's not a massive issue. It would be if we left the machine by itself.
To make decisions. But that doesn't happen. So this is more like a support to the decision-making process as opposed to exclusively being run by AI, right? Okay.
So it's together. And so as time goes by, right, and the accuracy of the prediction gets closer and closer to reality. And the other thing that we need people to understand, and that's really a cultural transformation as opposed to a technology transformation, is that they have to be open-minded. So at the beginning, it's going to be a little bit useless. Okay, that's fine. But if you are patient with it, right, it will get to a point where it will really help in what you're doing. So we need to be very selective in terms of the people you roll it out to, and making sure that they are understanding it culturally as well.
I guess how did you decide what data you needed versus what data wouldn't be useful? Because you're looking for the machine to provide you with insights that you can't do on your own, right?
That's right.
That's fair. So you cannot go into this with a predetermined outcome.
That's right. Exactly.
So how do you decide what data to put in?
And so you try to have data ingestion as open as you can.
Okay.
And so that's what there is this concept that you've been talking to clients about, is that maybe I don't know if it's the right way of metaphor, but I call it dark data. right? So
Sure.
like dark matter, right? So we know that there is dark matter, we can see it, and there is dark data. So there is a lot of data out there in the enterprise, not only in ours, in most enterprises, that is not mined, and there is an enormous amount of value there. And so how do you go about it? I mean, the best way that I know, and somebody knows a better way, please let me know, is to try to ingest as much data as possible on the process, so you can start understanding what's relevant and what is not. There is a lot of noise though, right? And it's expensive because you're going to have to load a significant amount of data that then it's not super valuable in the big picture.
Yeah, this sounds like a fairly long-term project on your part. Is that fair to say?
As I said, there are some things that that are low-hanging fruit. For example, I was talking about this GL analyzer based on machine learning. That was relatively simple. I mean, relatively simple to build. It took a few months. It wasn't like years, and we could put it in production quickly. The practice understood that they shouldn't take it literally at the beginning, right? So it was more like an aid, and then in time, the system started to learn very, very fast. And so that added a lot of value quickly.
Tell me about that. Let's talk about that, since that seems to be a more mature, that's what I meant by a mature use case, I guess.
Yeah. So think about audit, right? Just in general. So when we do an audit, we effectively, not only us, of course, right? This is the whole industry. We sample transactions, right? So there is, usually the client partner working with the client itself, the CFO and the audit committee, and say where we should look into, right? And so they decide on a plan, et cetera, et cetera. And then they go and do some sampling, right? So they go in, so they don't look at the whole universe of data that is produced by that organization. And so in the sampling, why do we need to do the sampling? Because it's such a laborious, intense, and very intensive type of practice that it takes time to do it, right? And a lot of people to do it. And so when you add the technology to do it, you can actually do it on a much larger data set. And so the accuracy and the quality of your opinion gets better and better, right? As opposed to, a certain of humans can only look at a certain number of transactions, as opposed to I'm going to actually unleash the machine against the whole of the data set. Are we there yet? No. But we're working in that direction.
So how is that a process twin and not just AI-enabled auditing?
Because you also need to look at the behavior, so how people use that information, right? So it's not just, so do you remember we talked about earlier, right, about the data that you need to run the processes, and then the data on the process itself. So the addition of, the data layer that allows you to understand how people behave in actually running that specific process allows you to improve the process itself. So if you know, for example, that people take, so one thing is to look into like a set of transaction and understanding an anomaly. The other one is to, for example, is to look into how much time does it take to do it, right? And where people usually get stuck, right? Why it takes, more time to go from step 3 to step 4, and then from step 4 to step 5, when in theory they are similar in terms of effort, right? Or, you're starting to see signal in the system overall. There is, an email exchanges of data that gets circulated, right, at specific times. So does that, raise the attention on something?
Yeah, well, you mentioned that last time, where if there's a certain number, I forget the exact example, it's going to be a rough estimate of what you said, but if there was a big flurry of emails before some critical deadline, then you could infer that there was a problem in Sao Paulo communicating with Frankfurt, for example.
That could be, or maybe not. Maybe they're just,
or maybe not.
It's talking about the workup, right? But but in general, yes, you can. So this is exactly the best use case. So this is not about giving the answer. This is about identifying an anomaly, getting a signal from the system that requires further analysis, as opposed to I'm looking at a gigantic, data set as a human being, and I really don't know where to start. I need to rely on my experience or somebody else coaching me or teaching me, etc. So you have that, and sometimes, the noise is just noise, right? So I don't know, maybe it happened that there was like, somebody's birthday, and so that's why there was a flurry of email, as opposed to, no, it's something that I look into.
Interesting. Yeah, they're planning a surprise party.
Exactly.
Has nothing to do with the contract coming up.
But this is about building a digital twin, right? It's about creating like a digital, equivalent of that process that allows, that particular value chain that allows you to understand that process and value chain better. We are at the beginning of it. Okay, so I'm not pretending here that we have, the secret sauce, but I think think about the pandemic, right? As well. People working from home. Companies don't know what their employees are doing. Right. It does. Again, this is not about Big Brother. This is not about me going into your computer and see who you're, sending emails to. That's not the intent here. It's are we optimizing, for example, the processes for remote working? So if you were spending most of the time of work in those like 8-10 hours that you are physically at work. Now that you are on a different schedule, for example, you like to work in the afternoons. Okay, great. And you work out in the morning. Fantastic. That's not an issue at all, right? But the work processes are not structured for that, and we have zero data on it, and we cannot optimize it. So maybe we can build a continuous, follow the sun type of environment where, especially in a global company, you have people handing over tasks to other people based on time zones, right? Or based on what you like to do as opposed to not like to do it, right? Etc. So I think that's an example of something that I think we could definitely improve capturing that data.
How can the average CIO, CXO, CEO, how can they apply what you've done to improve their organizations?
So I think, first of all, the acknowledgement that, to me, I don't believe in this concept of global processes. Right, so that you can build one global process that can adapt, that can be good enough for everybody. Usually, if you do that, it's the minimum common denominator, and you're going to sacrifice something. Okay, so that's step number one. Second, there is a lot of value in the data, not only in the data that you use to perform your specific, output, but there is a lot of data and things that you can learn from observing how the system behaves. Okay. So you can,
because a business ultimately is a system, and a business process is a part of that system.
That's exactly right. So if you observe, and so how do you observe? The only way to observe is to start capturing data. So you have to build your products, your technology products, in a way that they're capturing the interaction with the humans, and they're capturing the interaction of the enterprise with the third parties, and in general the environment. So that data set has in itself, what I was talking about the dark data earlier, has a lot of value in my mind. Do we know exactly what it is in there? No.
So, but to get started with this stuff, it seems to me you would maybe identify a business process in your organization that is fairly extensive. I would think you'd want a fairly large one, not just a simple one. I could be wrong, but like looking at our supply chain.
No, I think supply chain is absolutely a perfect one, right? And so I would start, if it was me doing it, right? Like I would start with interactions between the different players in my value chain. So who are the agents in that value chain? It can be my people in my organization. It can be somebody outside, etc. So I would start tracking that. So what are the touch points? What happens? I have timestamps on it, and see, okay, whenever I interact with that particular partner, this is what happens. And when I interact with the other partner, this is different. So can I use this different as a template for everything else? Okay, so you see what I mean? So I think it's just it's almost like an ongoing research project, if that makes sense, right?
Well, I guess what I was going to say is you have to, because the output is not determined, or it's not deterministic. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but you don't have a predetermined outcome in mind.
Exactly.
So you just have to pick a set of inputs then, right? That's really where your focus needs to be, is on the input side. And what data are we going to look at? What KPIs are we going to ingest? And then turn those models loose to find out what happens on the other
And
side.
you don't even need to know the KPI in a way, right? So
Okay.
because when you know the KPI, you reverse engineer it into the data.
Okay. So you introduce bias by.
Right. So I would want to, so depending on the value of the process for the specific company, right? But let's say we go back to the supply chain and I'm like a manufacturer where I need to harmonize supply chain coming from, different components of the supply chain, many different players. So again, this is an example of the concept, and maybe we need to change the name digital twin to something else, but effectively.
Well, that's why I like process twin. So
that's fine. But most of the time, what companies focus on, they focus on local optimization. Okay, so meaning they pick two things and they try to optimize those two things, right? Those two things might not be aligned to a global optimization process, right? So if you use mathematics language, right, you're getting to a local minimum as opposed to the global maximum, right? So when you start elevating, so that's really about the elevation and the abstraction of these analyses, right? So instead of optimizing the delivery time between me and you, maybe we should optimize the delivery time for the organization. And maybe at that point, we'll have to change the way we approach overall delivery optimization, right? There might be good reasons why things are in a certain way or in another. And so to me, the level of, the bottom-up data-driven approach to understand an interaction, it's super valuable.
Okay. Well, I like that. I like that actually, as opposed to the whole supply chain. Let's just look at delivery times and let's see what we can do with that. If you're big enough, right? I mean, this is going to, if you're 50 people, you can probably do this with an Excel spreadsheet, right? But if you're 50,000 people, right, that's where I think, am I wrong in assuming that's where the value of this really starts to kick in, is organizational size?
Yeah, and sometimes people just talk about value in terms of cost management, right? Okay, I'm going to remove 5 hours of time, but that is difficult to translate into real benefit because you're not going to fire people because they're going to save 5 hours a week anymore, right? So that doesn't really work. But what you can do is actually you can improve the quality of the work that you deliver. So if I can deliver a better audit or a more or can do a better advice to a client because I'm looking at a bigger data set than I'm looking at a smaller data set. It's quality, it's value, right? So sometimes we focus on, okay, let's save, that's the difference with automation, right? Oh, we're going to all save 5 minutes time times 300,000. It's a lot of minutes. Yeah, but really, is it going to come to the bottom line of the firm, of the company? No. Right. If you can offer a better service and people are happier, because they do a job that is more rewarding, they don't get into menial tasks and things like that, then I think where the value is.
So I get let's end on this question is, most companies are in firefighting mode all the time. They are in looking at processes in a micro environment because that's how they function. That's how they have been successful. That's how they optimize. That's right. So how do you free up the time and the mind share to go after these things in a global way?
Yeah, this is I don't think I have the silver bullet here. I think this is the challenge. Okay. One thing that I can tell you is that I speak to a lot of clients, and when I say these type of things, maybe 3-4 years ago, they were looking at me in a strange way. Now, I think a lot of people are starting to understand the potential for these technologies, right? So do they know exactly what to do next? And is in my way better than others? I'm not sure, honestly, right? We'll see. So maybe there is a better way of doing it. It's faster and cheaper and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the ability to understand your environment with data better, right? How all the different players in your ecosystem, value chain, etc., interact with each other. When I look at people, like people are starting to nod, right, and say, "I understand." And again, you don't need to be super ambitious on day one. Oh, I'm going to build a digital twin of my company. No, that's a little bit science fiction at this point. But I think there are some things that you can do very quickly in terms of, as you said earlier, right, Alan, like identifying core super important processes like supply chain and see how interactions play. and then you get to the next level and to the next level. They just need a little bit of help and guidance and maybe trials and errors, right? So it's lots of trials and lots of errors.
All right, Nicola, great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation, Alan. Thank you again.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe. We post new episodes every week. If you'd like to join our mailing list, become a guest, or suggest topics for future episodes, you can find us on LinkedIn, on our landing page at anchor.fm/InsideDT or at InsideDT.net. Talk to you soon.